So what I wanted to do was just tell you a little bit about a policy paper that we're just in the process of producing at the moment. And just in terms of context, I don't really need to tell you the context. You understand that mine water geothermal heat is widespread, low temperature, stable, renewable, accessible, and geographically variable, which is important. Um, It's worth pointing out that there's increasing policy relevance at the moment because of especially with the recent change in government with a very heavy emphasis on decarbonising heat. Well, there's a heavy emphasis on decarbonising power, and the assumption is that you need to decarbonise power before you can decarbonise heat, because decarbonising heat is going to rely on decarbonised power. So the focus at the moment is really on the electricity system, but there is growing awareness that heat systems need to be decarbonised in their own right. There's certainly an emphasis on thinking about poverty and energy poverty, and it's now explicitly recognised in local authority energy planning that heating is a service, and they should be mandating development of heat networks. So that's getting much closer as well. There are a number of significant challenges. I mean, some of these challenges have not changed since the North East Local Economic Partnership came out with a mine water energy paper in 2021. And some of the organisations are the same, like the Mining Remediation Authority, the National Geothermal Centre, UK Geoenergy Observatory, BGS, and we have a strong research base now in a number of universities, including obviously Durham, where we are. But there are enduring challenges, and they're around the fact that the levelised costs of mine water heat are competitive, you could argue, but the payback periods are very long, and we don't really have a scalable business model at the moment. There are still a number of risks associated with extraction boreholes, which we've heard about today. There are regulatory and policy issues, clearly still. There is a lot of issues around awareness and attitudes amongst stakeholders, including potential consumers. Distribution of the resources is anything but equal, and we don't necessarily have all the skills and labour forces in place to tackle these at the moment. So what I just wanted to really speak about for a few minutes today is the way that might be addressed. So what could government do in particular to unlock this resource that we have? Because the principal barriers are interrelated financial and risk-related issues, we could argue that the technical challenges are sort of secondary, and they would be manageable once the economic and regulatory framework is in place. So, okay, we could ask for direct support. So that would be things like a replacement for the renewable heat incentive specific to geothermal heat. So payment for heat produced. Which will be a development of the contract for difference approach, so a guaranteed price in the market for heat, or other kinds of funding like green bonds or forms of partnership funding. We could ask for a state-backed insurance to de-risk the exploratory phase of borehole drilling, because that's where we think most of the risks probably are. We could certainly ask for financial support for a national network of combined commercial and R&D boreholes, so that we would know more about borehole issues, which would again be another way of de-risking that investment. And we could look at financial support for supply chain development and stakeholder engagement, because we've seen again today how incredibly important both of those are. But beyond, I think beyond financial, direct financial support, there are a number of other kind of policy and regulatory changes we might be campaigning before. I'd be interested to hear if people agree on this. On the energy policy front, we think that geothermal resources generally, including mine water, should be included in energy and decarbonisation policies. At the moment, they're sort of glossed over rather vaguely. We think that heat should be explicitly treated as a resource with its own distinct regulatory requirements. There's an argument that until gas is phased out, then you should decouple the electricity from gas prices. So Chris Stark, who leads the Clean Power mission, argues that if in 5 years' time we've reduced the amount of gas in the energy markets to less than 5%, then there's no need to decouple. But that still leaves us with 5 years in which we have to struggle for investment because we don't have we're kind of we don't have the advantage of the cheap electricity because it's tied into a market. There's an argument for directing local and regional authorities to consider mine water geothermal heat alongside other geothermal resources in their strategic energy and heat planning, which they're not required to do at present. So that's on the policy side. On the regulation side, we could, it would be helpful to have a bespoke regulatory and licensing framework so that there's a single, speedy and easily navigable permitting process, which at the moment, as we again heard today, is still quite chunky. Similarly, to have a transparent and equitable licensing framework for sustainable extraction by multiple users of thermal energy and groundwater resources will be extremely helpful. At the moment, it's a bit like first come, first served, and we know from, for example, grid connection applications, that's not necessarily the best way to go about it. On planning and building regulations, again, we could create a presumption in favour of proposals for development that use mine water geothermal in coalfield areas. We could direct local and regional authorities to consider the potential for it in strategic planning of any residential and industrial development, so that they would have to argue against it rather than us, developers having to argue for it. And in a way, this would develop a comprehensive approach to planning in the subsurface, which we currently don't have. So that would be kind of the whole set of policy and regulatory improvements that would help. There's a whole area around leadership as well. I think mine water geothermal heat needs to be explicitly recognised in energy and related policies right across the country, so that local authorities are empowered to lead on the development of the source. So through strategic regional planning, for example, or through developing supply chains. And that means, again, workforce planning and skills development need to be, they're reliant on leadership to get them up and running at the national and regional levels. So that again means that policy and finance support needs to be provided for key organisations in the sector. And very importantly, community participation throughout the planning and decision making is absolutely essential to get local support for proposed infrastructure development. And that actually runs counter to current national government policy on decision making for infrastructure, which is trying to move community participation opportunities out of the way as if they're a sort of time wasting obstacle we should step on. We argue the opposite, that actually it's really essential to get local support, and that should be factored into the cost here. Because the argument is, in the long run, it makes it less expensive because you don't pursue projects that are not going to succeed.
Simone, could you wrap up in the next minute, please?
I can do, yeah. So the final thing is just to say, obviously for our own collective interest, research and knowledge, that government needs to support research and information management. So things like collation of resource and demand maps at site planning scale to reduce costs and risks. Further developing modelling and engineering approaches, so we have resource to assess so that we can assess the resource and the impacts, including a national network of boreholes, for example, to support reduction of risks and costs, and the development of a robust licensing system. We do need further exploration of financial, carbon and social costs and the benefits of different kinds of mine water systems, so that we can have a more sort of rational regional planning of investment to do the best projects first. And then finally, we really think there's more work to be done on community and other stakeholders' beliefs, perceptions and needs in respect to heating and district heating to guide the engagement work that's really essential to get mine water heat up and running at scale. Thank you very much.